Scariest part of horror games isn't what you see, it's what you're left to imagine. A door that's always just too far to reach, a note with only half the message, a world that feels alive, but empty. The deeper you go, the less you understand, and that's the real terror. We don't remember the jump scares, we remember the unseen, the broken pieces of a story, the things we fully never grasp. Why do we keep on coming back? Why do we search for answers in the darkness even when we know we might never find them? It's because horror games don't just show us fear, they make us live in it. In the words of Natalie Goldberg, we live in the world when we love it. On the surface, this quote feels comforting, even hopeful, but in the world of horror, love is often a ghost, a memory left behind in a world that no longer exists. What's left isn't love, but grief, and that grief doesn't fade, it festers. It makes us search for meaning in the wreckage, even when we can't make sense of it. Horror game lore works the same way. It doesn't answer all your questions. It makes things incomplete, just out of reach, forcing you to search for meaning. And it's that very incomplete storytelling that makes it unforgettable. Stay with me, because what lies beneath the surface of the games is far more terrifying than the monsters that chase you. Psychology of horror lore. What makes horror game lore different from other genres? It withholds more than it gives. A file with missing pages. A mural that doesn't make sense until it does. An enemy with no name, but eyes that seem to know yours. This kind of storytelling taps into something primal, our need to make sense of things. Our brains are wired to find patterns, to finish the puzzle, to fill in the blanks. And horror games leave out a lot of blanks, but that's what makes them unforgettable. We become obsessed not just with what happened, but what could have happened, what we weren't told, what was hidden, what was missed. The ambiguity doesn't just push us away, it pulls us deeper. It's the fear of the unknown, but worse. It's the fear that the truth is knowable, and we weren't just smart enough, brave enough, fast enough to find it. This is how horror game lore becomes a trap. Not one with teeth and claws, but of thought. You keep playing, keep researching, keep theorizing, not because the game asks you to, because something inside of you won't let go. Techniques horror games use to deliver lore. Horror games don't always tell their stories. They whisper them. They hide them in the walls. They bury them in bloodstained journals. They make you work for every piece of meaning, and that's exactly why it stays with you. Let's break down some of the most haunting ways horror games deliver their lore. Environmental storytelling. Sometimes the world itself is the narrative. In Dead Space, the USG Ishimura isn't just the setting. Every corridor bleeds tension. Blood-smeared walls whisper stories of desperation. Messages like cut off their limbs scrawled in panic double as a survival tips and desperate cries. The cold, utilitarian design of the ship reflects a world where workers are expendable, with corporate horror as the architecture. Sounds broken only by distant screams or groaning metal become part of the story. You don't read what happened. You feel it around every corner. In Resident Evil Remake, the mansion isn't just a setting, it's a map of human corruption. The way it loops and locks and reveals secret passages mirrors the twisted intentions of Umbrella itself. Every hallway hides a story. The horror isn't in what's explained, it's in what's implied. Found documents and audio. The lore isn't dumped on you, you find it, like evidence at a crime scene. In Fatal Frame 5, fragments of suicide notes and photographs build a legacy of grief and spiritual rot. Each file you find isn't just an exposition, it's a last breath, a personal scream before death. Outlast weaponizes footage in psychiatric files, turning voyeurism into a slow descent into institutional madness. You don't just read about horror, you uncover the paper trail that proves it existed. The result? You become complicit in the story. The game doesn't just scare you, it involves you. Symbolism and metaphor. E.T. is a masterclass in psychological horror through minimalism. There's no combat, no cutscenes, just a looping hallway that shifts with each pass. But what makes it haunting is the symbolic weight behind every change. The game's lore is never directly stated. Instead, it's hidden in garbled radio broadcasts, ghostly whispers, cryptic images, and violent subtext. A dead wife, a cursed fetus, a cycle of abuse that repeats endlessly. You're forced to piece together a narrative from fragments, feeding a mythos that lives on long after the demo was pulled. Cry of Fear is less about survival and more about suffering. It's a descent into a fractured psyche. Reality blurs with nightmare, and the deeper you go, the harder it is to tell whether you're fighting monsters or your own thoughts. Cry of Fear doesn't give answers easily, and that's what keeps it haunting. The uncertainty, the guilt, the question of what really happened is what lingers long after the credits roll. Why horror game lore stays with us. Horror game lore doesn't just fade after the screen turns black. It lingers, it festers, and sometimes it grows even darker in the silence that follows. That's because the stories we encounter aren't just about monsters, they're about us, about the fears we hide, the guilt we bury, and the questions we never answer. In Fatal Frame 5, suicide and death rituals are not presented as spectacles, but as tragedies, quiet, heavy, and drenched in sorrow. You don't witness death, you feel the weight of it. You see how it corrupts memory and how people attempt to control the uncontrollable. Cry of Fear traps you in a downward spiral of a fractured mind where nothing is certain and everything hurts. Its monsters are metaphors. Its horrors is personal. It's a story of hopelessness wrapped in the skin of a survival game. Then there's PT, the ghost of a cancelled masterpiece that's become more powerful in death than it ever could be in life. With each loop through that hallway, you're taunted with fractured stories of abuse, of guilt, of something wrong that can never be undone. The game refuses to explain itself, and that refusal is the horror. It forces you to obsess, to interpret, to invent answers you never verify, and so the curse continues. In Dead Space, the real terror isn't just the necromorphs, it's the silence of the Ishimura, the way corporate lies, religious zealotry, and alien influence all intersect to dehumanize and destroy. You piece together what happened through graffiti, blood trails, and broken recordings. Each one of a reminder that humanity was the first thing to die out here. Resident Evil Remake seems straightforward, zombies in a mansion, but dig deeper and you find a story of bioweapons, betrayal, and how science becomes horror when ethics are erased. The twisted layout of the Spencer Mansion mirrors the twisted logic of those who built it. Lore isn't just told, it's built into the architecture. What unites all these? Ambiguity. Horror games rarely give closure. Files are incomplete. Voices are cut off. Symbols remain undeciphered. But that ambiguity sticks. It crawls into your thoughts, and your imagination fills the gaps. Sometimes the horror isn't what happened, it's what might have happened that you were never allowed to see. The best horror lore doesn't just scare you, it marks you. It makes you question. It makes you feel. And worst of all, it refuses to let you forget. As you walk away from a horror game, it doesn't stay behind, it stays with you. The lore, the unanswered questions, the unresolved terror, it lives in your mind, growing in the dark spaces between your thoughts. There's a reason why the best horror games don't explain everything. They don't tie up loose ends, because they understand something essential. Horror isn't about closure, it's about what you can't escape, what you don't understand, what leaves you haunted. The world breaks everyone, and afterward, some are strong at broken places. Ernest Hemingway. This quote speaks to the nature of horror game lore. This story doesn't have to explain everything for it to matter. The broken fragments and narratives, the cryptic messages, the unsettling imagery, the art weaknesses, they're the strength of horror. They force us to confront things we don't want to face, and in that confrontation, we become something else. The lore weaves itself into our understanding of fear, and we carry it with us, often without realizing it. Once it sinks in, it becomes part of who we are. Horror game lore isn't just there to scare you, it's there to stay with you, to make you think, to make you question. And that's why it's so unforgettable, because sometimes the scariest thing isn't the horror itself, it's the questions it leaves behind. What if you'll never know the truth?